Are you an empathic person? Do you sometimes find yourself overwhelmed by what your loved ones are going through? Well, stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Dr. Judith Orloff about the genius of empathy, practical skills to heal your sensitive self, your relationships, and the world. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Judith Orloff, MD, is a member of the UCLA Psychiatric Clinical Faculty and is a New York Times bestselling author of 8 previous books. She's a leading voice in the fields of medicine, psychiatry, empathy, and intuitive development, and she specializes in treating highly sensitive people in her private practice. We'll talk about the genius of empathy. Dr. Orloff, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Before we talk about the book itself, tell us a bit about your background and how you came to study empathy and to treat sensitive people.
Well, I was a very sensitive child, and I was brought up by 2 physician parents and 25 physicians in my family who were linear and logical and scientific. And I was this little girl who would sense things or have intuitions about things or view people in terms of how my body felt about them. And I always gave a lot to people, and I would be drained by that. And so my parents didn't have any kind of name for that. So they said, "Oh dear, you're just overly sensitive." So I grew up believing there was something wrong with me, that I was ashamed of my sensitivities. And my reason for writing The Genius of Empathy is to help other people realize if you're sensitive and you want to develop empathy, this is the most beautiful trait you possibly can develop. And it's so worthwhile to bring peace to your own internal life and external life.
So let's start with the title of the book. What is the genius of empathy?
The genius of empathy is that it has the ability to give you options on how to have better relationships by being empathic, as opposed to going to war with your loved ones. For instance, in relationships, sometimes people make their loved ones into the enemies. And it comes from familiarity. They're always there. And so they attack them. And so there's a kind of war going on at home. And so what the genius of empathy can do is allow you to change that pattern so you just don't slip into it in a kind of lazy way. You want to treat whoever you're living with, your beloved, you want to treat your friends, with empathy and with respect. You don't want to sink into your lower self and go to war with them or criticize them or blame them. It's just not going to make for good relationships. So everybody who wants to improve your relationships, I can give you examples of how to do that. For instance, if your spouse is talking about something that's irritating you and you retaliate with some comment, which makes things worse, that will only create a war between the two of you. And the spouse will feel bad, probably. And so the option would be to say, I'm having a bit of a hard time understanding you, but I really want to. So can you slow down a little bit and just explain it to me? That will make a big difference in your relationships, because people want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be valued. And if you could remember that about the genius of empathy, if ever you're in doubt, give that to people and they will soften. And they won't get into this rigid, I'm going to fight you to the end stance, which you don't want to get into with your family, or friends.
So some people may feel like they're more empathetic than others. And is this something that just comes to people naturally, or is this a skill that we can actually develop?
This book is about skills that you can actually develop. If you want to become more empathic and have more loving relationships and have a more loving relationship with yourself and stop waging wars on all fronts. You don't want to argue with so many people. You want to try and get along with your loved ones and people around you so you can have a peaceful life. But the empathy can come when you're born. It can be a result of nurture and what happens in the family. For instance, if very sensitive children are raised by narcissists or sociopaths, it can be very detrimental to them because they're not taught to really express their sensitivities in a way that can be nurtured and appreciated.
There's a lot in this book we won't have time to talk about, and I do want to talk about some specifics, but before we do that, give us a brief overview of this book and what readers are going to find here.
All right, the Genius of Empathy is divided into 3 parts. The first part is how to develop empathy for yourself. The second part is how to develop empathy for your relationships. And the third part is how to develop global empathy for our fellow humans and how we can possibly get along without these horrendous wars that humans have been waging for millennium, which aren't getting anywhere. Empathy gives us a chance to see things differently. And if you want to see your spouse differently, your children differently, your coworkers differently, empathy gives that new set of glasses so you can see them and approach them from a different point of view. And then you can actually get along with them. The payoff is that you can get along with them, you can appreciate each other, you can have more fun. You're not always fighting or hostile or shaming or blaming. It's just an endless cycle that goes nowhere.
But as you point out, it starts with having empathy for yourself. Because I can see a couple different things, and I want to talk with you about that. One is just to give yourself a break and have empathy for yourself, but also to protect yourself from becoming overwhelmed if you find yourself being so empathetic toward others that it's hurting you.
That's right. That can happen. And empathy, as I'm defining it, doesn't mean that you're empathic all the time to everybody and you sacrifice your lifeblood for another person versus practicing self-care. It's not that. It's giving when you can. It's giving what you can. Sometimes it might mean setting limits and saying, I could listen empathically to you for 10 minutes, but then I've got to go. Would that be okay? And people are so starved to be listened to. In our world, we're going so fast, and listening is a lost art. So I want people to begin to learn how to listen to each other again. That means being present. That means you interest me, and I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to be there with you when you say it. So you make somebody feel very worthwhile and important, because they are. And you want to listen to them and then maybe help them in whatever way you can. But if you overgive and you, let's say, watch too much news and you're overwhelmed by all the stress in the world and the wars in the world and all the lack of empathy in the world, it can drain you. So as an empathic person, you need to learn how to set boundaries for yourself so that you don't watch too much news. So that you don't get into political arguments all the time with people. It's just going to be draining for you. It's fine to have healthy, empathic discussions, but that isn't what people usually do. They usually fight with each other and go to war with each other and blame each other. So you want to change that. And if you're looking for a life that isn't full of that much hostility and blaming and shaming, I think this book is for you.
So it sounds like you have to control that external stimuli that's coming at you and maybe overwhelming you. But what about that internal dialogue that sometimes we're very hard on ourselves? How can we learn to be more empathetic to ourselves?
Yes, that's the starting place. Is you always have to start with yourself. And everyone who's listening knows what it's like to wake up at 3 a.m. and have your mind going like this. All right. You have to have a retort to that. You have to have a strategy. Yes, you don't want that to continue. And that's the mind is jabbering. You want to get into your heart, which is a more loving dialogue that you can talk to about yourself and say, hey, that was a terrible day at work, and I don't know what the solution is tomorrow, but I know it's going to be better. Something like that versus what an idiot you were. You talked to that person the wrong way. You made such a mess of it. So if you hear the difference in the tone, you want to give yourself the benefit of the doubt here and build yourself up because you did try your hardest. You did. And you need to focus on that versus bludgeoning yourself and going to war with yourself, which is what many people do. And especially during an illness, if you say these horrible things about your body, like, why don't you heal faster? And what's wrong with you? And I hate you that you got sick. And all these horrible messages to your body hears that, and it won't help your healing. You want to say, I appreciate you, to the body. And I'm so sorry you have to go through this. And we're going to do everything to heal together. So it's a different way of talking to oneself.
I'm talking with Dr. Judith Orloff about the genius of empathy, practical skills to heal your sensitive self, your relationships, and the world. And our conversation continues in a moment. If you appreciate this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you'll know when I post new interviews. And thank you. You mentioned that one of the keys to being empathetic toward others is listening, because people want to be heard. And sometimes that's easier with loved ones, but what if it's coworkers or maybe even family members that you just don't like? What advice do you have for showing that empathy, even though it might go against your initial feeling toward that person?
Right. Well, in the book, there's a section on how to deal with empathy at work and the types of people who can drive you crazy and how to deal with them with empathy, like the chronic talker or the drama queen or the narcissist or the passive aggressive person. How do you deal with each one? Because it's a little bit different with each one. For instance, with the drama queen who's going to come to you with every upset under the sun. My mother doesn't understand me. My boss never gives me assignments that are up to what I want, and nobody understands me, and I'm just all on and on. Just like this. What do you do? Well, number one, you don't ask them how they're doing when you see them. That's very important, because then they'll start up. You want to say, hi, nice to see you. I'm involved with it's a big project right now. And if they start up, oh, I've had such a bad day, you use I'm not interested body language. Move your body in the opposite direction. Look at them with a kind look in your eyes and say, I will hold you, in a positive light today, so it goes easier for you. And that's it.
In your book, you talk about different types of empathy. I think 4 different types of empathy. Describe those for us.
Yes, the 4 types of empathy are cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, intuitive empathy, and spiritual empathy. And cognitive empathy is related to having empathy with your mind, where you have really brilliant linear thinkers, and they live mainly up in their head, not in their body so much. But what they can give you is a lot of empathy through their mind, and they really do wish you well. And so it's not a loss. People often come down on cognitive empathy and they think, well, it's not the heart. And that's true, but it's a wonderful thing. Anytime somebody can express empathy, however they're most comfortable with it, you just accept it as a gift. And then there's emotional empathy, where you feel everything. I feel what's going on in you. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. And you even over attune, and you sort of jump into people's bodies and become them. You become so overly enmeshed in what another person is going through that it detrimentally affects you. And so part of the genius of empathy is learning how to observe, not absorb. You don't want to absorb other people's stress or pain. That's not healthy empathy. But you do want to keep a step back and not over-identify with people and be able to feel with your heart and yet not absorb their stress. That's part of the skill set of the genius of empathy. And it's really doable. I mean, because I have very strong empathy, and I love that about myself, is that, I set limits every day with myself and how much I can give and how much I can't give, and when it's appropriate to give and when I'm over giving, because I love to give and love to heal everybody in the world, take away all of your pain. I'd love to do it, but healing doesn't work that way. So,
in terms of these styles of empathy, Do people tend to operate out of one style or another, or is it a mixture? And is it important for us to understand what style of empathy we have?
Yes, because it helps you know yourself a little bit more and find your comfort level with empathy. For instance, if you have cognitive empathy and you think it with your mind, you can be happy with that. That's nice. But there's a downside to it too, and that cognitive empathy, people who express that tend to offer solutions too quickly because they want to fix the problem, and it's usually with empathic listening, it's too quick and people won't feel listened to. They want to have some time to get it out. So just as a tip for the cognitive empaths out there, just wait a little bit for solutions. Just say, I hear you. That's all you have to say. I hear you. I'm listening. You don't know how therapeutic that is. That is so therapeutic. I hear you. I'm listening. People are hungry for this. There's an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And when somebody cares enough to sit with you and listen, it's the most beautiful gift you can give somebody. If you have emotional empathy, you want to be careful of not getting too overly involved with people and absorbing what they have. And then intuitive empathy, you might get intuitions about the person, which is great. Like your gut feeling might tell you, this doesn't feel right. You get like a red flag. The enteric nervous system in the gut has neurotransmitters that allow you to know things, just like neurotransmitters in the brain. And so you have gut feelings, you get aha hunches, you get knowings, and you get beware, or you get go forward. So you get all kinds of intuitive guidance that is very useful for you. And then the spiritual empathy is you see the best in people. You see all of their best qualities. And often these people go into the clergy, or they go into healthcare, and they're helping others because they love helping others. That the downside of the spiritual empathy is that they don't see the whole person, and that they don't see the dark side of the person as well. And we all have a dark side, whether you like the thought of it or not. We all do. And we have to learn how not to let it rule us. And that's about awareness and what kind of people we want to become. But we're not without a dark side. So all of this is about self-acceptance. It's about having empathy for yourself as much as possible, finding out what type of empathy you have, and then you can experiment with other types as well. Now, you don't have to just stick to your default setting. You might want to experiment with what's it like to be more open emotionally with my relatives. What does that feel like? Can I be there for them in that way? As opposed to, can I fight with them, or what can they give me? It's empathy is a whole different attitude. And empathy isn't about getting walked on like a doormat. That's unsuccessful empathy, if that's what's happening. You need to be empowered in terms of your empathy. So you need to learn how to set boundaries. If someone is disrespecting you, you must set a limit for it and perhaps leave. If someone's dumping anger on you, you have to say this, I'm not subjecting myself to this, bye-bye, if you can leave. And so it's about how to take care of the self. And then if you apply all these types of empathy to a global sense, we have a chance of showing an interest in our fellow humans and finding out how they tick rather than just going to war with them.
I want to ask you about one particular situation that a number of people find themselves in, and that's being in the role of a caregiver, because you are so intimately involved with that person, taking care of them, that I can see it might be easy to sort of get burned out. But at the same time, you don't want to lose that empathy toward that person because you're responsible for providing care for them.
Yes, that's right. There's a chapter in the book on healthy giving. And one of the situations is if you're a caregiver. And I've been in that situation with my parents and also with some other relatives. So I have pretty much a lot of experience with it. And it can be terribly exhausting. But I believe it's a sacred act to be a caregiver and to help somebody through a physical, emotional crisis, or if somebody's departing this realm and going elsewhere, to help transition them. But in the meantime, the caregiver has to show self-empathy during the process. Otherwise, they're just going to be so tired and depressed, or they might be prone to an illness. So that would like a flu to stop them from being with the person, because their immune system is so worn down if you just give all the time, and especially if it involves suffering. One of the hardest things in the world is to be around the loved one who's suffering, someone you love with all your heart who's suffering, and you want to take it away from them. And sometimes it isn't possible. You do your best, you get all the best physicians and stuff, but sometimes pain is inevitable and it's hard to watch. And so during that time, you have to be very kind to yourself and take time out for walks, go look up at the sky, do something different. And that will give you more to give when you go back into the situation again.
Well, there's so much more in this book that we won't have time to talk about. What would you say are some of the key concepts, the key insights that you hope readers will take from the book?
The key insight is that empathy is one of the human traits that can help us change our relationships in the world. And if you want to learn it and apply it to yourself or apply it to your family, it can only help you. I mean, you have to see the amazing effects it has on people who are just expecting you to argue with them. And when you don't argue with them and you say, I see your point, let me think about it, their mind is blown. They're so used to fighting. Human beings are so used to fighting with each other. So empathy gives you another option, and people are longing for connection. And this book will help them find more connection with themselves, with their friends, with their loved ones, their coworkers, with their animals, with nature. You'll be able to connect. You'll be open. You won't just be a disembodied head walking around with no feelings. And so, this could only improve your life and bring you happiness, and you want love. The only people who don't really want love that much are the narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths, who I write about in the book, who have empathy deficient disorder, meaning they don't have empathy, so they're not really looking for it, but what they are looking for is power. And power is not the same thing as love. So empathic people are looking for love. Narcissists are looking for power. Two different points of view.
To learn more, the book is The Genius of Empathy: Practical Skills to Heal Your Sensitive Self, Your Relationships, and the World by Dr. Judith Orloff. Dr. Orloff, thank you for talking with me today.
You're very welcome.
Now, if you'd like to purchase The Genius of Empathy, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you'd like to see more videos about books and their authors and a wide variety of topics, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.